Alright, hello everyone. In this video lecture we're going to be talking about plagiarism, which I think a lot of people have a feeling that they kind of know what plagiarism is, but over the last however many years I've discovered that it's just not the case. So please make sure that you watch all the way until the end, because there might be a couple points of clarification in here. So first things first, let's talk about what plagiarism is. And I like to go over this because I think that a lot of the time we as instructors sort of assume that students know exactly what plagiarism is and how to avoid it. And what I've discovered is that's just simply not the case. And maybe students aren't quite aware that what they're doing is plagiarism. Now, most students know or should know at this point that if you copy and paste something from the internet without citing it correctly, that counts as plagiarism and should result or may result in a 0. But let's go ahead and look at a definition. So the MLA handbook uses this definition, right? Which is plagiarism is literary theft. So it's taking both somebody's ideas or words as their own. So again, one of the points of clarification is that plagiarism isn't just about copying somebody else's wording. It can also be copying their ideas without, again, providing correct attribution. Now, as far as Shoreline is concerned, of course, most schools, and Shoreline is just one of many, have some sort of policy against plagiarism. So here's one from Shoreline, and again, very similar. Plagiarism includes taking and using as one's own without proper attribution ideas, writings, or work of another person. So not necessarily another student, not necessarily something offline, and we'll consider some of those other things in there. But just know that there is something specific about plagiarism in the Shoreline Student Handbook, and this is really common for every college and university that I can think of. Now, this is not just something that affects students. So this is Bob Caslin, the former president of the University of South Carolina. And a couple years ago, maybe 3 years ago, Caslin plagiarized his commencement speech from retired Navy Admiral William McRaven. And in response to this discovery, he did resign his post. So, again, even people who know better than to plagiarize sometimes end up plagiarizing, and it is a very serious offense. In this case, again, somebody who definitely should have known better ended up having to resign, essentially losing his job. So when it comes down to it, we can ask ourselves, why do people plagiarize? Why did Bob Caslin plagiarize McRaven? Well, in his comments on it, he said, well, he was kind of stressed and he was kind of under the, time pressure of a deadline. And it seemed like this other person already kind of said it better. And that to me is what I hear a lot from students as to sort of why people plagiarize. And kind of in no particular order, we usually get something like this, where it's laziness, or we didn't know what plagiarism was, or we wanted a better grade, or we didn't think anybody would notice, or there's kind of that time crunch. And then, of course, number 6 is this lack of confidence. Now, I think that there are definitely components of laziness and time crunch, but I think it's really more common that students don't realize what they're doing is plagiarism, or they don't trust their ability enough to kind of put things in their own words and do kind of the hard work of that deep critical thinking. So again, if we can get rid of all of these, but number 6, I will be pretty happy. But again, I would encourage you, give it a shot, try to put things in your own words, come up with your own ideas, because that's where we become better thinkers and writers. So one thing that I often encounter when I'm discussing plagiarism with students, either because they've plagiarized an assignment or they're not sure and they're kind of nervous, the question becomes, does it matter if somebody intended to do it? And of course, the important thing to note here is that whether or not you intended to do it doesn't entirely matter. So if you think about it this way, if I am going down the freeway and I am speeding and I get pulled over, that police officer probably isn't going to care whether or not I meant to speed or kind of did it unintentionally. I still broke the law, and it's still a serious offense. So again, whether or not what we're doing is intentional or unintentional, they're still equally serious. So when it comes to intentional plagiarism, and I hope that nobody's done this or is planning to do this anytime in the future, is that intentional plagiarism is you meant to do it, you tried to pass off somebody's words or ideas as your own. And again, it does include kind of copying your own work, and I'll go into that a little bit more here in a later slide. Unintentional plagiarism is you didn't really mean to do it, and this is the one that we can address. If you're intentionally plagiarizing, it doesn't matter how much we talk about it, you're probably going to continue to do it. And I mean you metaphorically, a person. So if it's unintentional, it usually means that the student forgets to sort of correctly reword or credit the original author. But again, it is just as serious. So one fun thing that I usually do, because I can, is ask students in a face-to-face class, and you can pause the video and try this exercise, is I ask students to intentionally plagiarize this quote. That's probably the only time in your academic career that an instructor will ask you to intentionally plagiarize. And the exercise is really meant to, hey, if you wanted to get away with this, if you really wanted to plagiarize and try and trick somebody, what would you do? And the rule is you have to change some parts. You can't just simply copy it over. And this is an example that I am borrowing from the Purdue OWL website. So you can take a second and think about, well, what would you do if you wanted to intentionally plagiarize this? And I'll go ahead and move on in 3, 2, 1. So often it's something like this, where students have reworded slightly, maybe taken a couple words out, maybe rearranged the sentence structure. But really it's almost the same. Instead of students frequently overuse, we have students often use. So again, all of this is to say that what we have here, well, somewhat reworded and some of the words have been changed, is still definitely plagiarism. And there are a couple easy ways to fix this, one of which is simply making sure that we are crediting the source. So in this case, it would simply be according to Lester, and then using direct quotation marks, so quotation marks around something, and that would go a long way towards sort of avoiding plagiarism. So if we kind of move forward a little bit, I want to look at another example, because I think that first example, hey, changing words is still plagiarism, is what a lot of people understand. But if we look at this source text here, everyone uses the word language, and everyone these days talks about culture. Languaculture is a reminder, I hope, of the necessary connection between its two parts. If that's the source text that I'm using, and I write this sentence, we can ask, well, is that plagiarism? Right? At the intersection of language and culture lies a concept we might call languaculture. A lot of the time students will say, well, no, that's not plagiarism, and we're not using the exact words. But the fact of the matter is, in this case, because the source text came up with the term languaculture, we can't simply use that term here without giving the proper attribution. So it's a pretty easy fix. What we want to do is make sure that we are including the person's name there. At the intersection is a concept Michael Agar has called languaculture with a page number if appropriate. And that goes a little bit more into MLA citation. So, if you need to review that, let me know and I'm happy to help. So again, the main thing that I want you to take away from this first part is you can't just change the wording. And I think that there is, at least for some students, the perception that, hey, if I just change some of the wording, make the wording, a little bit different, use some synonyms, then it's not plagiarism. It still is, because again, what I want you to remember is that plagiarism is not just taking credit for words, but also for ideas. Okay, so now that we know what it is, how do we avoid it? So I'd say there are quite a few ways that we can avoid plagiarism, and the best place to start is really with how we are using evidence. So once you go out and you find that good evidence and it's reliable and you like it and you want to use it, it depends on how you incorporate it into a paper. And of course, for all three of these, the direct quote, a paraphrase, or a summary, you are going to want to make sure that you are using the correct in-text citation in MLA 8.9 format. I say 8.9 because we're kind of switching to MLA version 9. Direct quote really takes the original words word for word and puts it in quotation marks, and then includes that citation. A paraphrase kind of rewords the original statement, highlighting the main ideas. But really, what you could think about is again, kind of paraphrasing or shortening what somebody else has said, and we're still going to use an in-text citation. A summary is kind of like your back of the book description. If you're looking at a book at the bookstore and you flip it over and you read the back, that short blurb, that's what a summary is. Or the trailer for a movie is a summary, right? So we're taking a massive chunk of information and condensing it down, usually into a short sentence or maybe two. Now, one way to think about this is if I had a conversation, a direct quote would look like the entire conversation. I'm going to quote the entire conversation word for word, like I have here with these two roommates, and you can pause and read this if they're kind of arguing over who's going to do the dishes. But if I wanted to take it from a direct quote and do a paraphrase, that might just be, hey, they were arguing about whose turn it was to do the dishes. So you've still got a lot of the detail there that they're arguing, that it's about dishes. But if I wanted to summarize, I'm really condensing that down into, hey, these two people were just arguing about household chores. So you can see that things get shorter. We lose a lot of the detail as we go. So in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and pause this video here and this video here and let you kind of think about intentional versus unintentional plagiarism and the different ways that we could paraphrase, summarize, or use direct quotes. And then I'll pick up with that in the next video lecture. All right. So in the meantime, if you have questions, comments, concerns, jokes, memes, or recipes, let me know. Otherwise, I'll talk to you all.